I found out my family is hiding my fiancé's affair with my best friend. So I'm flipping the switch and getting revenge. The result was pure pandemonium. It was just another lazy Sunday afternoon. The kind where the sun lulls you into a sense of complacency and the hum of the city feels a million miles away. I was sprawled on the couch, a half-read book lying forgotten on my chest, as I mindlessly scrolled through my phone. Tom was in the shower, whistling some tune that had been stuck in his head all week. Everything was normal, or so I thought. My phone buzzed with a reminder, family dinner next Friday. I rolled my eyes. Those dinners were always a mix of awkward conversations and my mom, trying to show off her latest Pinterest-inspired recipes. I typed a quick reminder into Tom's phone calendar. He wasn't great at keeping track of these things. As I opened his calendar, a message notification popped up at the top of the screen. Don't worry, she doesn't suspect a thing. My heart stopped. It was from Peach. Confusion followed, succeeded by a cold dread that seeped through my veins. I knew I shouldn't, but I clicked on the message. The screen opened to a group chat titled The Inner Circle, and the most recent messages hit me like a freight train. There they were, a string of texts between Peach, Alex, and a few others talking about everything from mundane day-to-day stuff to shockingly intimate details about meetings and feelings. The kind of details that you never want to see involving your fiancé and your best friend. For a moment, I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hands. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Maybe Tom was planning a surprise party or something, anything other than this. I scrolled up, desperate for something, anything that could explain away the nauseating feeling in my stomach. But as I scrolled, the truth became undeniable. There were dates, times, secret meetups, even discussions on how to keep me in the dark. Each message was a betrayal, each word, a lie. I felt sick, the room spinning around me as the reality of the situation settled in. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed evidence, something concrete, before I confronted them. With a grim determination, I began taking screenshots of the entire conversation, every message, every heart-breakingly casual reference to their deceit. I transferred the screenshots to my own phone, then deleted the evidence of my snooping from Tom's. If I was going to confront them, I needed the element of surprise on my side. With the evidence secured, I sat back and tried to process everything. How long had this been going on? Had everyone known but me? The thought made me feel foolish, isolated. I thought back over the past few months, trying to piece together the signs I must have missed. There were late nights when Tom came home from work long after dinner, the weekend trips Peach had started taking to clear her head, and the way they both had been acting a bit too casually around each other. I was pulled from my thoughts by the sound of the shower turning off. Panic, I said to myself. Tom would be out soon, expecting to find me just as he'd left me, lost in my book and none the wiser to the world crumbling around me. I couldn't let him know what I'd discovered, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. I quickly wiped the tears from my cheeks, straightened up, and grabbed my book, flipping it open to a random page. By the time Tom walked into the living room, towel drying his hair, I had managed to school my features into a semblance of normalcy. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, pausing to kiss the top of my head. "Yeah, just lost in this book," I lied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "That's my girl," he smiled, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "I'm going to make us some coffee. Want anything?" I shook my head, watching him disappear into the kitchen. Alone again, I felt the weight of what I had discovered bearing down on me, betrayal by the person I loved and trusted most, and by my best friend. No, my former best friend. The pain was raw, a fresh wound that I knew wouldn't heal easily. But beneath the pain, anger was simmering, a righteous anger that demanded action. They thought they could play me for a fool, hide their deceit behind my back. No, I wouldn't let this slide. They had underestimated me, and they would regret it. As Tom hummed in the kitchen, the pieces of my plan began to fall into place. The rehearsal dinner, yes, that would be the perfect time and place, a gathering of all our friends and family, the people they had lied to as well. It would be public, humiliating, and utterly devastating. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, but at that moment, I didn't care. They had brought this on themselves. I would bring the truth to light, let them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I was there, but not really. My mind was elsewhere, plotting, planning, ensuring that when the moment came, I would be ready. And when it was over, when the truth was out, maybe then I could start to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. But until then, I would hold on to my anger. It was the only thing keeping me together. The next few days were a masterclass in acting normal. I plastered on a smile every morning for Tom, chatted about mundane things, and laughed at his jokes, all while my mind was constantly replaying the messages I had seen. The nights were the hardest, lying next to him, pretending to be asleep while my mind raced. It was a kind of torture I had never imagined. Each morning, after Tom left for work, my real day began. I turned our apartment upside down, looking for any physical evidence, old receipts, stray notes, anything that could add weight to the screenshots. It felt wrong, invasive, but the need for complete certainty drove me. I found a few receipts for dinners built for two at times when I was either at work late or visiting my sister in another city. Each discovery was a small victory and a deeper wound all at once. Armed with this new evidence, I sat down to organize everything. I made copies of the receipts and wrote down dates and times, aligning them with text messages and call logs I had pulled from Tom's phone while he slept. I was building a case, as if preparing for a trial where the jury was our families and friends. Midway through my sorting, a knock at the door startled me. It was Lisa. I hadn't realized how much I needed a friend until I saw her standing there, concern etching her face. "Hey, you've been MIA for days. Everything okay?" she asked, stepping inside. I hesitated, then decided it was time someone else knew. I led her to my makeshift command center, with paper spread across the living room floor. Her eyes widened as she took in the chaos. "What is all this?" Lisa asked, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. "It's Tom and Peach," I said, the words tasting bitter. I handed her a stack of printouts of the screenshots. "They've been having an affair." Lisa's eyes darted quickly through the messages, her brow furrowing deeper with each one. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with empathy. She sat down beside me, her presence comforting. "I'm not just going to let them get away with it," I said, my voice firm, more to convince myself than her. "What are you planning?" she asked. "The rehearsal dinner. I'm going to show everyone what they've been doing behind my back." Lisa nodded slowly. "Okay, how can I help?" Readiness to stand by me was a lifeline in the swirling sea of my emotions. It helped me make sure I had everything straight. I didn't want there to be any doubt when I laid it all out. We spent hours poring over the evidence, sequencing the screenshots and receipts, making sure every piece of the puzzle was perfectly placed. Lisa suggested we create a digital slideshow, something that could be played on a screen, irrefutable and stark. "Let's make it impossible for them to lie their way out of this," she said, her voice hard. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt for dragging her into this mess, but she was right. We had to make a strong case. We worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. By morning, we had a timeline that started with the first flirty message and ended with the latest rendezvous. It was damning, AR of deceit, so clear and straightforward that no one could deny it. The next step was to ensure that the technical aspects of the dinner would go off without a hitch. I called the venue under the guise of discussing the dinner menu, casually confirming the AV setup. "Oh, and can we test the presentation equipment when we set up?" I asked, my voice light. "Of course," the event coordinator replied. "You can come in early to get everything ready." Perfect. The day before the dinner, I went to the venue to do a dry run. I met the AV technician, a young guy named Derek, who seemed more interested in his phone than his job. But when I explained what I needed, he perked up, perhaps sensing the urgency or the drama in my voice. We tested the slideshow, a series of slides that began innocuously enough with photos of Tom and me before transitioning into the texts and ending with the receipts. Watching it play out on the big screen was both satisfying and heart-wrenching. "Looks good," Derek said, giving me a thumbs up. "It'll definitely make an impact." "That's the plan," I replied, the weight of what I was about to do settling heavily on my shoulders. I drove home, the city lights blurring past. The apartment was quiet when I got back. Tom was still at work. I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the anxiety, but it clung to me, a constant reminder of the confrontation to come. That night, as I lay in bed beside Tom, his breathing steady and unsuspecting, I felt the magnitude of what tomorrow would bring. There was no turning back now. My hands were trembling, my heart was heavy, but my resolve was unbreakable. I was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. After all, I wasn't the one who had lied and cheated. I was just the one brave enough to bring the truth to light. As the day of the dinner approached, I felt my resolve harden. I wasn't just doing this for me anymore, but for every person who'd been lied to and played for a fool. I called the venue again to double-check everything. The manager assured me all systems were go. "I hope your event is unforgettable," he said cheerily. "Oh, it will be," I responded, a tight smile on my face. The night before the dinner, I barely slept. My mind raced with what-ifs. What if someone tipped Tom off? What if the tech failed? I had backups for my backups, but anxiety gnawed at me. I got out of bed and rehearsed what I'd say, standing in my living room as if it were the venue. I practiced until the words felt hollow, then went back to bed. Exhaustion eventually pulled me under. Morning came with a sense of inevitability. I got up, dressed in something sharp but unassuming, nothing too flashy. Today wasn't about celebration. It was about revelation. I met Lisa for coffee before heading to the venue early. We went over the plan one last time, every detail etched in my mind. At the venue, I greeted the staff with a calm I didn't feel. I handed over my USB with the slideshow and watched as they loaded it onto their system. Everything looked good. The screen flickered to life, showing the first benign slide of Tom and me in happier times. It would be the last happy image of the night. As guests began to arrive, I played the gracious hostess, my stomach churning with nerves. Tom arrived, all smiles, clueless about what was coming. Peach was right behind him, equally oblivious. They mingled, laughed, and embraced family members. I watched them, my heart hardening with every fake gesture they made. Lisa stayed close, her presence a steady reminder of why I was doing this. "You okay?" she whispered as the room began to fill. "As ready as I'll ever be," I murmured back, my fingers tightening around the remote in my pocket. It was almost time. As dinner wound down, I excused myself under the guise of starting the slideshow. My hand didn't shake as I pressed the button. The first incriminating message appeared large and unmistakable. A hush fell over the room as phones were abandoned and all eyes were drawn to the screen. I stepped back, watching the faces of our families as confusion turned to shock, then to outrage. Tom's face drained of color. His eyes locked on mine across the room. Peach looked like she might faint, while my mother's expression crumbled, her earlier defenses shattered by undeniable proof. The room erupted into chaos, voices raised in anger and disbelief. Amid the uproar, I felt a strange peace. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the reality of what I'd done set in, I knew this was only the beginning. But whatever came next, I'd face it head-on. After all, I'd just blown my old life to pieces. Now it was time to start anew. I hesitated. My instinct was to refuse to stay and watch Tom and Peach squirm. But the look in my mom's eyes was one I couldn't ignore. With one last glance at Tom, who was now arguing with his own parents, I followed her out of the room. The cool evening air was a sharp contrast to the heated atmosphere inside. My mom walked a few steps away, then turned to face me. "I can't believe you did this," she said, her voice low and fraught with emotion. "Do what?" "Expose the truth," I retorted, my anger rising again. "They were lying to us, to all of us. How could you defend that?" She shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not that simple," she began, but I cut her off. "It is that simple, Mom. They betrayed me. You saw the text." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the weight of everything bearing down on her. "I didn't know how to fix it," she whispered, almost to herself. "I thought it would just go away." "How could you think that? How could you let me go on planning a wedding with a man who was cheating on me?" The hurt in my voice was palpable, even to me. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting you by lying, by keeping this from me. I felt tears prick at my eyes, a mix of rage and heartbreak. We stood there for a long moment, the only sounds the distant voices from the venue and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Finally, my mom reached out as if to touch my arm but seemed to think better of it. I'm sorry, she said, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. I really am. I messed up. I looked at her, and saw not just my mom but a flawed, scared human being. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made it harder to stay angry. I don't know if I can forgive this, I told her honestly. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand, but I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I didn't respond, turning back toward the venue. The night was far from over, and there were still confrontations to face. But for the first time, I felt a tiny sliver of pity for my mom. It didn't change what she'd done, but it was a start. As I walked back inside, the noise hit me like a wave, arguments, crying, shouts of indignation. The pandemonium I'd unleashed was overwhelming but necessary. It was time to face the music and whatever came next. I was ready for it. After all, there was no going back now. My aunt went ballistic, calling my mom a cruel, heartless B-word over and over. My mother hurriedly checked her phone and thought, I sent her the screenshots. She started screaming and becoming irate, saying I was really trying to ruin her life again. I was right. She still apparently is upset about being caught having an affair and being shunned. My grandparents' reaction hurt the most because they started screaming at my mother. My grandmother was trying, with a few of our other guests, to hold my arm back as she started screaming every explicit word she could. My grandfather was screaming at my mother that he didn't raise a daughter. At this point, everyone is screaming and crying in hysterics. My other bridesmaids were cussing Paige out and calling her a whore. I hate to admit it again, but I took joy in that. My grandfather went on to scream at Tom with some things I can't say here because he was very explicit. I just started laughing and sobbing. I had so many emotions that I genuinely think my body didn't know what to do, so it did everything. The tears just kept coming. My cousin afforded me outside as fast as she could, with Tom chasing us down. He kept screaming my name and begging me to talk, to explain. I ignored him, and my cousin was pushing him away from her car so she could get in and drive off. She took me to my aunt's house and told me to stay there and not answer the door for anyone. I kind of felt like a kid being left at home alone. All I did was just sit on the floor. That's when I just started bawling. All the emotions I've kept pinned up for a whole week just finally came up. After about another hour, my aunt and cousin came back home. They hugged me for like a good 5 minutes. When we finally broke off, I noticed my aunt had a few scratches on her. I'm assuming they couldn't hold my aunt back for my mom for much longer. My aunt caught me up on everything. Apparently, after my cousin drove off with me, Tom came back in and started screaming at Peach for ruining everything. They got into a screaming match, and some of our friends were trying to split them apart. My grandparents, my aunt, and Tony, my mom's husband, were drilling into my mother for answers. Tony was the most livid. Apparently, during the family trip, I couldn't go, and my mom told Tony that I had offered my ticket to Peach so she could enjoy a nice break for herself. Tony, at this point, is screaming and reading some of her messages out loud. She was begging him to stop and that she could explain. My aunt started adding that she better start explaining because all she sees is a worthless mother and a vile person. Apparently, this set my mother off, and she started screaming about how she hated me, about how I ruined her life and made it difficult. She felt like she could never be happy because I was always a constant reminder of her biggest mistake ever, and she regretted not aborting me when she had the chance. I am the product of my mom's secret affair, which set my aunt off. She basically pounced on her for context. My aunt is infertile, in her words. I was the daughter she never got to have. So, in her mind, she went full mama bear mode on my birth giver. That's what I'm calling her now. My aunt has been more of a mother to me than my biological mother ever has in the past 22 years of my life. To summarize some of the details, Tony is divorcing my mom. He's had suspicions for a few months that she's been cheating again. Peach exposed Tom's text to her that he was sleeping with her because he felt I was growing distant. A while back, I wasn't always putting in overtime at work to save up for his birthday, and he was lonely and didn't know how to bring it up to me. Peach's father spammed her with calls and was cutting her off financially. Apparently, Peach believes this is my fault, and I'm an evil witch for ruining her, according to her texts. My mother has been on a tirade with our family, exclaiming I'm an evil person for destroying her world again. She should have thought about that for condoning anything. My half-siblings felt it wasn't their place to say anything to me, and that I should have expected Tom to look elsewhere because humans aren't monogamous and people love who they love. Same old, same old. A lot more has happened, but to avoid my brain from imploding on itself from the stress and anger, it's finally out in the air. I've been getting texts and calls from everyone, but at that moment, I've left my phone in the other room. My aunt offered for me to stay with her until I got out of this jumbled mess. I accepted, seeing as I have no intention of going back to that apartment. I've already emailed my landlord and will handle it all next week. My boss emailed me back and said I was allowed to use some paid time off for as long as I needed. I will definitely take it, seeing as I'm highly considering moving somewhere quiet and peaceful. My aunt and cousin are at my place, getting some of my things, and my cat, Tom, is there begging them not to take my things and to have me just talk to him. I don't know what he thinks the conversation will do. The emotional and mental scars I have are not going to go away for a while. I also know I have a long journey waiting for me in therapy. However, things have escalated heavily. The next day, I woke up and took a long, hot shower. I turned my phone back on and couldn't even unlock it or clear notifications before I got a call from one of my bridesmaids. I answered, and she immediately started screaming at me about how I could ignore Peach and Tom in their time of need. At first, I was confused, seeing as I don't give a damn about them anymore. I asked her not to yell at me, but she continued anyway. She screamed that Peach had self-harmed when she sent me the images. They were very top surface level, enough for the scar to appear and a little blood. Regardless of whether or not it was deep enough, it still shook me. I wanted to scoff on the phone because, at this point, I knew she was doing it to rally people on her side since I wouldn't respond to her text. Yet, she also told me Tom tried to OD. His friends found him at my apartment, all groggy. They took him to the hospital, where he was cleared since they didn't have to pump. They are keeping him on watch for the next 72 hours, which is good. Just because I hate his guts doesn't mean I want him dead. After this, my friend group has been split very heavily since I didn't respond to either of them before they did this. I still have no intention of talking to either of them. I don't really care what they do for attention, just as long as they leave me the hell alone. During the initial confrontation with my egg donor, which is what I'll be calling my biological mother from now on, Tony found out my egg donor lied to him and said Peach could take my ticket to go with them for the trip. They got home and started arguing more because Tony brought up the suspicions he had about my mother cheating. She started screaming at him and confessing everything. She told him I have siblings that aren't his and a lot of other very hurtful things. He had to call the police on her to escort her off his property. Tony followed up with me this morning to tell me he is divorcing her. His lawyers are drafting up the papers within the next week or so. He told me that my mother confessed that I was the product of a long-term affair she had with his best friend. My egg donor is a very vile woman, I'm coming to learn. Yet, after finding out Tony is getting the papers, she has tried to backpedal. She has been calling my aunt, begging her to convince Tony not to do this, or else she will be homeless. She's been trying to call Tony and his family, but they all have been ignoring her. This wasn't enough for my egg donor, though. She knew my aunt's schedule and tried to come over to assault me. My cousin was still with me, so she couldn't get in. But hearing her scream at me triggered some of my very low insecurities, and I started to have a panic attack. My cousin took me upstairs when we heard a loud crash. My mother broke through the window, ran upstairs, and attacked me. For once in my life, I hit my egg donor back. All the anger I had towards her, I finally let out. My cousin was struggling to separate us, so she had to run to get our neighbor. I only have a few scratches and bite marks, but outside of that, I'm okay. I'm also placing charges against my egg donor. Hopefully, I can get a restraining order. Honestly, my mom ran off before the police came, but I gave them Tony's address just in case he tried going back there. I see that those evil people aren't going to stop until they get a response out of me. However, on the weird side, I got a call from my half-sister. She tried apologizing, and I cut her off because I don't want to hear it anymore. She then scoffed and had the nerve to ask if I could watch my nieces while she, her husband, and her boyfriend all go on a trip. I love my nieces and nephews, but I told her that she could go of herself if she wanted me to watch her nieces. Then, she would have to ask through my aunt. She started screaming about how I was being unfair to her and punishing her kids. I told her I was punishing her, not her kids. She said, never mind, and that I couldn't see my nieces. I knew this was something that could happen, but it hurt my heart. I'm pretty sure she's telling them I hate them. I'm keeping the screenshots, and my aunt and cousin said they would back me up if they reach out in the future. Everything that happened is so much, but I'm expecting more to happen, honestly. One thing I know about egg donors is that they hate losing. I know she sees this as a loss, and she won't stop until she comes out on top. My half-brother has me blocked on everything, and I'm pretty sure he is siding with my half-sister. I'm just really emotionally distraught, but I feel like I have to write this in good news though. I start therapy next week. My aunt and cousin are currently packing up Tom's things and dropping them off at a buddy of his. His name is Kyle. He's on my side and has been helping me through all of this as well. He dropped off my favorite fruit this morning to my aunt and also assured me that I can talk to him anytime. I asked him if he would be in further communication with Tom, and he said no. He's just holding on to his things until his parents can pick them up. I really appreciate him, but that's it for now. I plan on getting a restraining order on my egg donor.